Wow.
Hi, everybody. I can see some of you.
See a few.
I see a lot of people smiling, which is always good.
That's what we want.
So we're here to talk about Sam's book, and
Which is exciting. I mean, just the fact of that.
yes.
Let's
How long did it
luxuriate
take you
that
to
for a
do this
minute.
book?
Way too long. This is a book that I've had a lot of jobs at the New York Times. I find that being a journalist, you know, if you have a little ADD and a lot of problems with authority, it's a really good job. And so I've moved around a lot. I've worked as the arts editor. I worked as the restaurant critic. I was the national news editor, and now I'm running the food department in NYT Cooking. And I started this book when I was national editor.
How long have you been, like, what year was it when you first walked through the New York Times
I hitched
office?
my
Yeah.
horse to the, I got to the Times at the beginning of 2002.
Okay.
And I guess I had the idea to do this book while I was doing that national job, thinking that it would be nice to write about the subject of family dinners after a long work day of weather events and school shootings and all the horrible stuff that you have to deal with on the national desk, and wonderful stuff as well. But it turned out no time. There's no time.
Surprising,
The news
shocking.
keeps going.
Yeah.
So I wasn't able to pick it up until just a few years ago.
And when did you start doing restaurant criticism?
I did restaurant criticism following my stint on the arts desk. So I guess that was like 2010, 2012 in there. That's a job that's hard to complain about, but I'll try. Yeah, it's a great job. It puts you out in the city 6-7 nights a week. Death by massage. It's a wonderful thing to do, but it is tiring.
It is tiring. I mean, as someone who eats a lot at work, you know, it seems like a high-class problem to have, and it is, but it still is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Did you also use disguises and stuff like that?
Well, disguises, wigs are tough for bald guys.
Well, you don't have to fit anything under it. Like,
Yeah, no,
it's so easy.
no,
I have to wear a wig cap.
Yeah, so yeah. The problem is that for guys in particular, I think wig technology has not gone quite as far as it needs to, and so it's pretty obviously a wig.
Okay.
And you spend much of your time seated in the restaurant with the server
Oh, and they
above
can see
you,
on top of it, so they
looking
can see your
down at your
roots.
cheap-ass weave on the top of your head. So, but then I realized that there are a lot of bald white guys in New York City, and the thing to do was misdirection rather than full disguise mode. And so it's pretty well known, or it seemed to me it was pretty well known in the restaurant world that I was this preppy guy who wore khakis and button-downs and blue blazers. And so switching that off just a little bit was remarkably successful. So for instance, a black dress shirt, maybe a chain.
Wow. Like a thick one?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that
Extra button undone?
one more button undone. That guy just got here from Ireland. There's no way that's Sam Sifton. So.
Did you do accents? What were some of the names you...
Oh, I love the name business. So at the times when you're a restaurant critic, you dine anonymously, or you try as much as possible to dine anonymously. So we reserve under false names. We have fake credit cards. We use different phone numbers. It's like being Jason Bourne, but no danger.
That's great.
Whatsoever. And picking out those names was both a joy. I love being Chuck Scarborough for New Yorkers who remember Chuck Scarborough. But also a terror because it was easy to forget.
I always, when I check into a hotel and stuff, I would just keep one or two names so that if my family needed to get a hold of me, like for years, I can say it now because I put it in a book somewhere, but for years I was Dr. Nathan.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, Dr. P. Nathan, that's who I was, yeah.
Dr.
And then there was
P.
Pee Wee Reese, which nobody
Nobody's
knows.
gonna know.
Does anyone here know who Pee Wee Reese is?
Yeah.
Who knows who Pee Wee Reese is? Wow, I'm impressed.
We are at the
Or
92nd
Duke
Street
Snyder.
Y. Duke Snyder would be
Yeah.
excellent. But you take that credit card, you arrive, let's say I arrive at the restaurant early. I'm in the bar. I have not been recognized. Thank goodness. I'm psyched. I'm ahead of the game. I give the bartender the credit card in order to have a cocktail while I wait for my guests. My guests arrive. I want to move it or check it out, and then we'll move to the table, because it's, if you're not recognized, it's not super simple to just say, could you shift that to the tables bill? They want you to close out that bill at the bar.
Right, okay.
Okay, great. What's the card name?
Sifton. Samuel.
You're just, and who am I today? Scarborough? No? Smith. So that could be a jam up every time.
Yeah. And now, did you grow up with a love of food? Were you in the kitchen tinkering as a young boy or
I
young
don't know that
man?
I was in the kitchen tinkering, but I, like you, am a child of New York City, and so of course I was interested in food.
Yeah.
This is one of the great food cities of the world, and especially as a high school student, being able to kind of range widely around looking for cheap eats was a real joy, and understanding where you could get 5 dumplings for $1 in Chinatown, or where the best $1.50 slice was, or bao, or what.
Where is your favorite pizza? What's your favorite New York pizza?
Well, so this is I make.
And it's a loaded question.
It's a very
short answer.
It's a very loaded question, and and it's invariably the one that's delicious and easiest for you. I always people ask me that question. I say, what's your favorite dry cleaner in New York? And they're like, oh, this place on the corner gets stains out. It's incredible. Like, what are the chances that it would be close to your house, your favorite dry cleaner? I go back and forth on my favorite slice. My favorite slice for years was from Foscati on Henry Street in Brooklyn Heights. I fear it has slipped a little bit. At the same time, we've seen a rising tide of slice culture that has allowed some of the sort of fancy, used to be just full pie places to serve just slices. So Upside, which is just coincidentally a block from the New York Times, is a marvelous slice. New Park out in Howard Beach, Queens, excellent slice. Excellent slice. And Patsy's here on the Upper East Side is also a really good one. Coal-fired.
You like coal-fired?
I like the coal-fired from Patsy's.
Okay. All right. And so, did you grow up thumbing? Was it more, you talked about like, this is the best place to get a slice, this is the best. Was it more a going out to eat culture, whether it was casual or not? It wasn't so much at the stove,
Yeah, it was a little bit
at home, because there's a difference between people who just are entranced with food and going out and they know, this chef's name and that, what to order and blah, blah, blah. And then there are those people who just, like me, who buy cookbooks and literally read them like novels cover to cover. And then, that sort of their interest in food out
comes from that.
Yeah.
This is a good book to read cover to cover.
It's a great book, by the way, to read cover to cover. It's we'll get into the book in a second, but
I grew so. We're going to commence the squid and the whale portion of this interview. I am a child of divorce, and it's really interesting what happens to a kid in New York City who goes from eating around a table with the family to not so much doing that. And my mother, who was then a book editor at Knopf, would take us out, my brothers and me, we would take us out on Friday nights to a sushi restaurant. And it was magical to me, this change in how I experienced food, from something that my mother labored over, or my father labored over, or the family labored over, and we shared it around a table, to going into what amounted to a stage set, to experience something. And one of the other regulars was a guy named Jerry Nachman, who was then the editor of the New York Post. He was a big guy, and he would get these calls from the newsroom of the Post. And there were no cell phones. He would stand up and walk across the dining room and get the phone, and then he would be on the phone, big guy, and the need for a tekkemaki roll would overcome him, and he would walk with the phone across the dining room and pop a couple in his mouth, barking about the wood for the Post the next day. And I thought, that's it for me. Food, newspapers, that's all I want.
You're in. And so is this book then an answer to that?
It's a return.
To return, like this is you kind of claiming the dinner table back?
That's correct. This is me making the argument that in maybe perhaps especially in a city like this one that offers us so many opportunities to go out and experience the theater of life, to make it ourselves in our home, surrounded by our friends and loved ones. And I really want to emphasize "and loved ones," because I think that New York is a city of intentional family as much as it is of nuclear family, and that bringing a regular group of people, always with room for a stranger or a friend or someone new, together in the presence of food and drink is somehow magical.
It is magical. I mean, my favorite experiences are when I have a party, a dinner party, or not even a party, but a handful of friends at home. To me, I prefer that over going out. And there was that big article in Eater as well about this, that we've gone through the age of going out to eat and the celebrity chef culture and the cachet of getting this reservation or whatever, and that now the cool thing to do is to gather your friends and loved ones and family and cook at home. This, by the way, let me just wax poetic for a second. This is a great foundational book. There are books that you should have in your arsenal, especially if you've got a person in your life who's just buying a home or moving to a new city. And what I love about it is how straightforward it is. And I mean that word with the highest praise, in that sense, because so many recipes that I see or books that I thumb through, and we get 4 or 5 books at least every couple of weeks that kind of get hauled over for me to look over. And it is so beautifully straightforward. It is clear. It is direct. It is easy to understand. It doesn't use too many words on the page. It just tells you what to do. It is a very utilitarian book while still being really beautiful to look at.
This is just great.
I'm serious.
Great.
Because here's why it's good. Tell them you'll call them back.
Yeah,
it's because, in the beginning of the book, and as I said, I look at a shit ton of cookbooks. I have a shit ton of cookbooks. And they always have that section in the beginning where they tell you everything to buy and explain every obscure ingredient. And you read it and you're like, you know what? I don't want to read the recipes anymore. This just looks too intimidating. But I love how you say, okay, let me just give you the bare bones of how you should set up your kitchen and what are the real things you need. And I have to say I agree with you.
Good.
Good Dutch oven, a good, microplane to turn Parmesan into snow, which I love that phrase.
Thanks.
And, a good knife. Get yourself a bread knife. Get a paring knife. Very, very, the things that your aunt, who is a great cook, would tell you, or your uncle. When you were sort of buying your own home and finally having a nice kitchen where you felt good about investing in a nice set of pans. And then here's what I respect. I respect the pantry list, which is not 14 miles long.
No, it doesn't need to be.
And very useful. And I go through this, once in a great while will do for charity or something like a custom-made pantry, where I go and just clean out your whole pantry and order everything for you.
Wow, I'd like that service.
All the oils and spices and preserved lemons and all that stuff that you buy and should have, almost like a painter's palette. And I think yours is really useful and straightforward and is not something that's designed to show off your food knowledge.
Right, listen.
That's the difference between an actual book that you pick up in dog ear to one that you just drool over and then put on the shelf. And this one is great. I love how you talk about setting the table.
Okay, let me talk about that.
This is
super important because I love that phrase. Thank you so much for that. It's true. I think it's true anyway. But there's more than, you have the stuff you need to do these dinners, I would warrant. If you're joining us here at the 92nd Street Y tonight, you have most of the stuff, the tools in your kitchen to pull off these meals. But you're right to bring up this business of setting the table because it gets to this idea of intention, which I think is really important. We're not going to be like over the top, like you better be here on Sunday, young man. This is not a manual for grandmothers to harass their grandchildren with. What this is an argument that if you do this and if you make it slightly special, it will be special, especially over time. And the best way to signal that, to virtue signal, is to set the table, is to set the table with a kind of care.
Nicely, yeah.
Yeah, to put
And
out.
not necessarily fancy, but
Yeah,
just,
I'm not being snobby about it. It's not like you need to have finger bowls. It's that you do want yourself to feel, and you want your guests to feel, your family to feel, as if you didn't just throw it out on the table, right? It's not just, it's not that. There is a napkin. Maybe I would love it to be a cloth napkin, and eventually you will love it too, but maybe it's a paper napkin. But it's set with intention and care, as if, sorry to get spiritual about it, but as if preparing for a sacrament.
There is a ritualistic quality about setting the table
Yep.
every night, because it tells you now we're coming together to have this meal,
Yeah.
to break bread together.
And
that
something's
is-
going to happen.
That's what I really liked about it. And I feel like, no one likes me saying this, but some of the collateral damage on our collective health that happened in second wave feminism is that all these women went out to work, and so did their male counterparts. And there was no one passing down just basic information: how to roast a chicken, how to make an omelet, how to make a stock, how to make, just basic things, how to set a table, how to do it slowly, all of that. And I feel like, somebody needs to do it.
Well, I'm happy to do it, but I also think that a group of people came in to fill that void. And some of them here in New York City were restaurateurs, right?
Yeah.
Like we all of a sudden started to see, they're lagging now. Now restaurants are trying to be like our homes. But for a while, learning about how the table was set, if your parents weren't teaching you that, or your grandparents weren't teaching you that, you could figure that out at a higher end restaurant. And then a second wave of change came in through food television, where all of a sudden we weren't getting the tactile knowledge of how to make a stock, but we were seeing some of the effects of it. And that in my reporting, I've seen this now for more than a decade. You see kids who came up on food television who have themselves become cooks. And so, that makes you a TV mom. For
I like to think I'm a TV mom anyway, as far as food television goes these days. But I do think you're right. I think people in our culture are much more knowledgeable about food nowadays. And I have 13-year-olds talking to me about amuse-bouche parties.
Right.
They weren't doing that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I like to think that
they were
have something to do
amusing
with
their
it.
bouches in different ways.
Elsewhere, honey.
Yeah, but what's interesting is, to my mind, what's interesting is there's a trap there, right? And the trap is all of a sudden you're serving an amuse-bouche before your Sunday dinner, and that's not the direction we want to go. What we want is to have a core set of knowledge and values about cooking and a bunch of good recipes. I think I have some in this book for you, and then execute them with care and with a kind of with a simplicity that is elegant.
But also throughout the book, what I like is that even in the dessert section, and I'm not somebody who cooks a lot of dessert, all the recipes seem very approachable. They seem, also the tone, in which you've written this book is kind of like, okay, maybe you want to do this, but if you can't do this, you can open a can, but try to do this because it's really nice. And you kind of cajole. If I had to use one word, it's sort of like cajoling your reader to say, come on, you can cook too.
Yes, it's a confidence game. I'm trying to give you the confidence to do this, to make it possible to execute, and not just to execute this one time. I wrote a book about Thanksgiving, and the idea of the Thanksgiving book was to give people confidence that they could make this great American feast once a year. But this isn't that. This is a smaller victory, but a longer term one, right? It's a serial one. It's giving you the confidence that yes, once a week or so, once every 2 weeks, you can put together a meal of simplicity and elegance combined that will bring joy to yourself and, much more important, to those surrounding you.
And you get better the more you do it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Repetition is important in establishing that tradition.
Yeah, and it makes it ritualistic. You learn the ritual over time. And you have no idea what traditions are going to bubble up out of the experience of doing this. For some time now, our Sunday dinners, which aren't always on Sundays, have been accompanied by a dessert. I'm not a big pastry guy, although there's some very good pastry recipes in this book. Have been accompanied by like the most ornate, crazy Italian-American pastry, because a close friend of ours who attends these meals wanted to contribute, doesn't know how to cook, can't barely keep his life together, but he can go to the Italian place and bring these weird, beautiful, amazing Italian-American confections that have become a tradition of our Sunday suppers. I would never have seen that coming, and I'm delighted that it's the case.
And also, I mean, what was the editing process like? Because, you know, what didn't make it into the book? How many times did you test each recipe?
So all of these recipes come out of my work at the Times, and out of my work kind of trying to take those recipes and make them really large format, which I did in the parish hall of the Church of the Ascension in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, cooking for the congregation there after an evening Sunday service. And that was a great place to bulletproof these recipes, to take them out of my home where I was cooking for 8 or 10 or 12 and cook for 25, 35, 40 on a balky stove in a kind of moldering but beautiful parish hall. And
listen, I've cooked some of my best meals in the jankiest of kitchens.
You're like, well, I don't know, look at this knife. What is it, a bread knife, regular knife? All right, we're going to get done. So the testing process was both in home kitchens, my own and others, and then on a sort of larger stage for groups of people. Some of the recipes come from chefs I've interviewed in conjunction with my work on the food section of the Times and for NYT Cooking. Some from friends, some from family, from my mom, and others from just explorations of things that interested me and that I was able to track down. There's a recipe in here for a dish called Mississippi roast. And Mississippi roast originated, as far as I could tell, on the internet as a kind of set it and forget it crock pot meal. And I was able to track the history of it to a woman in rural Mississippi who just called it roast.
Like gravy?
Yeah. So she made this roast, and which was like a stick of butter, some pepperoncini peppers, some powdered ranch dressing mix, and some powdered gravy mix. And she threw it in a crock pot, and it just grew like crazy. And there's like 2 million pins on Pinterest, and she had no idea that it had that someone had called it Mississippi roast, and that it had taken off. So I was able to get that story, but I didn't really want to cook that with So I reverse.
Yes, I blame you.
Right? So I reverse engineered it into something that was, whole food, and I mean, seriously, because it was just a lot of sodium and a lot of fat, and also we can do all these things quite easily. It added like maybe 7 minutes to the preparation time, which was, to begin with, 30 seconds. So it really wasn't all that much work. And boy, I worked at NYT Cooking. It's in here for a reason. It's a delicious.
I want to talk to you about NYT Cooking in a second, but I want you to just read this head note. So you mentioned gravy.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, here we go, putting on the old spectacles. Sunday gravy. Even if you're Catholic, Lenny Bruce once riffed, if you live in New York, you're Jewish. His distinction was cultural, not religious. To be from New York is to live amid and within the cultures of the city's inhabitants. It doesn't matter where your parents were born or theirs. As a result, all New Yorkers are at some point Dominican. They're Irish, African American, French, German, Chinese. On Sundays, a lot of them are Italian and make a big pot of red sauce, then stir it carefully, often, to make sure it doesn't stick. I am as Italian as your Uncle Sven, but I'd put this recipe up against a Nana's. It will serve 6 for sure, more if you stretch it, and it's easily doubled to serve 12 to 15. Cook whatever odd cuts of pork or beef you see at the butcher or market to accompany the sausages. I often use marrow bones on top of what I call for below, and they nicely velvet the sauce. Serve with garlic bread because it's Sunday gravy, and that is how it is done.
That's a very good head note.
Thank you.
What is velvet the sauce?
Oh, don't you like that? I like that. I like that.
There are tons of little jewels of phrases.
Little shiny diamonds. I'm proud of the velvet the sauce. So when you cook a marrow bone, over time it releases the marrow within, which is a sort of amazing, I would argue, velvety liquid, not liquid. And as it kind of makes its way into the tomato sauce with all that fat, it creates a texture that I find on the lip and the tongue to be like, I don't know what velvet tastes like, but what velvet feels like against your skin. And I love a velvet sauce. And I love the image of a velvet sauce. And I hope that in calling it that, it encourages people to seek out that kind of pleasure in their cooking. It's so much better for me to talk that way or to write that way than to say, cook until the interior of the marrow bone releases its gunk.
Yeah, gunk doesn't sound quite as appetizing. You mentioned, your mother. What did you grow up eating?
My mother, a working woman in New York in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, cooked a lot from the local newspaper, the New York Times. She also cooked from Gourmet and other sources. But I really, really have strong memories of, and of course, Julia Child. So between Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Craig Claiborne, Pierre Fernet, and the others who were my predecessors at the Times, and the work in Gourmet, we had this, it was kind of remarkable to be, in 8th grade and come home and there's like a mackerel with some orange slices and black olives, and I gotta tell you, I did not want to eat that. But I didn't, I really didn't. But we ate it yes, I would go running after dinner and go to the pizza place, but it did engender in me an understanding that food was a lot bigger than what I thought it might be.
Both your parents are quite impressive. Your father also was a judge, and your mother edited a lot of books. Did she edit cookbooks? I know she edited your stuff before. Did she get to look at this manuscript?
She did get to see this manuscript before she died in December, and I'm really excited that she was able to see it in galley form. And actually a mock-up of the hardcover, and she was a book professional, so she was able to envision it, and I'm really proud that happened.
So did she have a lot of cookbooks other than the clippings?
Yeah, I've been working on them, and it's a remarkable collection, and it shows, I think, how magical. Even I run a food pornography site on the internet.
Pretty much.
But I love cookbooks, and it's so amazing to see in these collections recipes that you'll never find. You could ask Google, Google could have 30,000 engineers that are never going to find these recipes. Mm-hmm. And being able to luxuriate in them and perhaps bring them back to life is something that makes me happy to go to work every day.
Talk to me about New York Times Cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start that?
I did. Raised it like a little baby. We had a belief that, look, I had been on the national desk. I had spent months on the road traveling between our 13 news bureaus around the country. So the national desk covers everything in the United States, save for the metropolitan region and federal Washington, D.C. So I was out in the country a lot. And I ran into tons of people who loathe the New York Times, loathe it, but then would say, that Eric Asimov's pretty good on wine, though, or, I really like Melissa Clark. And then I would look in their kitchens, and there would be the New York Times cookbook. There's Craig Claiborne's book.
I have his books from college.
They're incredible.
I love them.
So the last time the newspaper or the New York Times went through a wrenching change in the 1970s when it was struggling, it wasn't a national or international newspaper, it was a local paper, right? And at that moment, Craig Claiborne had this notion, and it was his notion, not the newspaper's, that he could collect all these recipes he'd been working on for the better part of a generation and put them into the New York Times Cookbook, which then, bam, became a national bestseller for like a decade. Well, if Craig Claiborne could do that in the early 1970s, at a time when the New York Times was just a local paper, what could we do with all our recipes on a phone in the 2000s? Could we capture that lightning in a bottle again? Well, turns out it looks kind of like we can. We launched this thing. We've got 375,000 paying subscribers to NYT Cooking alone, which makes us like the 4th or 5th largest newspaper site in the country on its own. We're driving people into nytimes.com while we're doing this. And I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, I think we're making people's lives better.
You are. There's certainly an abundance of white beans. I just want to register that.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, you look at it's really interesting to see.
Well, the recipes have gotten a lot easier, which is good.
Well, we're pushing hard. We're pushing hard into one of our big holes. I think was midweek cooking, and guess what? White beans really help. But you know, I'm a student of the trends, and white beans have replaced anchovies, and it goes all the way back. I mean, there are some things in our archive that there was a period in the 70s when everybody was like, "Look at my microwave! This science oven is going to change everything," and it didn't change. Well, it changed everything for like reheating your coffee, but like those microwave souffles and stuff like that, that was a
really
big
work.
thing in the 70s in the Times. Those recipes don't surface.
No, they don't.
Hide those.
But I mean, do you get feedback? Is this stuff people are asking for with recipes that they write into the Times or whatever? Has that changed, or is that constant? Like you talked about trends. So how has the American cook changed in his or her needs?
Well, we're all eating a lot less meat and
That's
asking
good.
for a lot less meat, which is good for the planet, good for our bodies, and good for our souls. Nevertheless, I'll never go broke publishing chicken and salmon recipes. Not in New York City, boy. People like chicken and salmon. Salmon and chicken and salmon.
It's a lot of chicken recipes.
It's a lot of chicken and salmon. And there's some right here for your ease of preparation.
I also buy, for the record, I love white beans.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah.
They're great. It's just, you know, the Bieber is big for a little while, and then now we like Billie Eilish. It changes. Billie Eilish is a white bean. Anyway, we do pay pretty close attention to what people are looking for and what people are responding to, and then we try and give them a little bit more. I see a desire, not so much, they love the stuff they can make on the weekend. They want a hot breakfast on Saturday and Sunday. They love to bake when it's snowing. Anytime there's terrible news in the world, beef stew goes through the roof. I can see all of that, but I see underneath it this drumbeat of, can you give me stuff with more vegetables in it, less meat, maybe something I could cook in one pot on a Tuesday night, and it's not the same thing I had last Tuesday night.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would like all
Right?
the time.
That's what we want.
That's what we all do, yeah.
Which shrimp? Oh, the Yucatan shrimp. Thank you. Preach. Delicious. I'll eat that. But then you got this problem, like what shrimp? You know, this is what we wrestle with all the time. We're not there to be advocates, right? But we are there to tell the truth about what we're seeing in the world. And if, as we know, that shrimp is one of the things that Americans consume, one of the seafoods that Americans consume more than any other. We have that on one hand, and we have on the other these desperate reports of enslaved people harvesting farm shrimp in other parts of the globe. We know that, and then we're like, what about the wild shrimp? And the wild shrimp in the Gulf are problematic, and all we can do against that is report, tell you, and give you good recipes to work with when you're done. But thank you, I love that recipe.
So can you tell me, these recipes are so clear and just systematically well done. I'm sure that comes from the fact that you're doing it with your colleagues every single day. But do you think that there's anything about teaching public school that helps you be a good recipe writer? Because I always say, being a good cook is one thing, but being able to teach someone in a kitchen where you are not standing how to cook is a totally different thing. And so talk to me about any similarities that may be there.
So at the beginning of my career, when I was looking for work as a newspaper reporter and not having any luck, that happened to coincide with a moment when the Board of Ed was in real trouble and looking for teachers who could breathe, who were alive, and who had BAs. And so I had the great good fortune of getting a job as a social studies teacher at Bushwick High School in Brooklyn.
Can you imagine?
At a time when Bushwick was not filled with hipsters. It was me and the two Mormon missionary guys and everybody who lived there. It was a different time, different place, and an amazing school filled with amazing students who I love very much. Do we have any public school teachers here tonight? Oh,
they're home grading papers.
They're home. I'll tell you what they're doing. They're at home writing lesson plans, and the lesson plan begins. Every lesson plan begins SWBAT, student. Correct. And what is that other than a recipe? Cook will be able to prepare the chicken fricassee. And then the writing that follows, the lesson that follows, needs to be, you need to follow the kind of rules of expository writing to be as clear as possible and as helpful as possible to the student cook so that she, at the end of the recipe, can prepare the chicken fricassee. And, there's a lot of, it's a drag writing recipes sometimes, but on the other hand, there's real beauty to the form. It's a weird form of poetry, but a form of poetry nonetheless, where the creativity must bend the will of the rule that everything is going to follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and get out. And how much nonsense can you strip out? How sharp can you make each sentence? And then how much beautiful language can you fit back in without making it leaden or pretentious or unhelpful.
Or 7 pages long.
Yeah. Which is the worst.
What is the hardest recipe you think that you guys have ever published?
Oh, we have.
That would be a good Razzie type award.
Yeah, it's a marvelous recipe for the bread that Chad Robertson makes at Tartine on the West Coast, and it's, I think. When we got it, it was like 27 or 28 pages long. It takes a couple weeks to pull off, and trimming that down and trying to make it something that you could grasp and make and not go crazy while doing was a challenge. But boy, it's good if you want to be that guy.
How many times do you test a recipe?
It depends on the recipe and on the success of the testing process. But essentially, when I make a recipe, I'm like, hey, and if my kids were here, they would tell you, here's my response to virtually everything I make. That was pretty good. That was pretty good, don't you think? Sometimes it's not. So I got to go back. So I make it again. For the time, and then for this book, I went back a third time, and then I gave out the recipes to a cadre of people to make on their own in their home kitchens, and then report back, and to report back without judgment. I took that praise and criticism and retested once more. For the newspaper, I still call it the newspaper. For the Times, what we do is test once, then send it out. We don't use a test kitchen because I want these recipes cooked in home kitchens, not in fancy kitchens. Mm-hmm. And then we can come back and fix it once more. So 2-3 times per recipe, I would say. And still sometimes, you forgot to kill the duck or, 1 pound salt. How did that get in there?
So I have some questions from Instagram people.
Oh, Instagram.
So I asked you what your favorite pizza place is. What spices can you not live without, and what are you really into these days?
So on the gram, it's a little we're a little slick over there. I could not possibly exist without red pepper flakes and ground cumin. Like
Really?
I use a lot of cumin because I cook a lot of rice and beans, and there's something. I have a recipe in here for what I call islandish bean. I think I call it islandish beans, and essentially these are beans that riff off the Dominican beans that I grew up with at the steam table place. They're red beans, not black beans, and there's this like thrum of cumin underneath with oftentimes with pineapple or orange in there as well. And my kids happen to love that. My kids don't get to eat the same thing very often because we're testing so many recipes, but we keep coming back to those beans, and cumin plays a big part in that, and those red pepper flakes as well, and the sofrito really bring up the fire. So those two for sure. More hot sauce, Texas Pete, you gotta have some Texas Pete, gotta have some Matooks, a lot of hot sauces, I would say, for dressing things up.
For dressing things up.
Yeah.
And what is your favorite meal? Is it lunch, breakfast, or dinner?
Oh, wow.
Stunning, I know.
I hadn't really thought that one through. When I was restaurant critic, I loved dinner, boy, because it was like, that was my job, and I was like on stage trying to figure out the story of a restaurant through the execution of the plates. And as a home cook who does these dinners, I love the business of serving them. I love that so much. But for myself, eating monkishly alone, I really like breakfast. I like breakfast, and I like how breakfast can always be the same, or it can be the same for a while, so that for a whole run of time, you're just eating, a poached egg with a little like Faco kaya toast, like honey on rye and some soy sauce, and you do that for a month, and then you're like, why did I do that? I just want to eat yogurt and fruit.
Yeah, you go through these jags.
And it's so magical, and we don't do that with any other meal of the day. I mean, perhaps we do at lunch. I try not to. I don't like lunch. Lunch is my least favorite meal of the day. It leaves me logy, sleepy.
Sleepy. Lethargic?
Lethargic.
Yeah, leaves you
nappy.
Nappy. You don't have enough hair to be nappy. I'm just curious about who didn't make the cut into this book. Just give me a couple of recipes that you were like, you know what, fuck it, I'm not putting this in there.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I love duck. And really? You're going to tell people to make duck?
Yeah.
There's a goose in there, but
I saw that.
The duck didn't make the call. Well, we're getting the hook.
All right,
What's going on?
questions.
Oh, more questions from Padma.
Thank you.
What's interesting is book publishing, as a lot of people know, but it's surprising to me as a newspaper guy, the book publishing is significantly slower than publishing a newspaper. It takes longer. And
it's
so
incredibly slow
compared to what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I've written hundreds of recipes since finishing See You on Sunday. And so it's really interesting to think about man, I wish I had put that baked tofu in there, but I didn't even know about that baked tofu until we figured it out, my kids and I, just a couple weeks ago.
So I have a last question before I ask some of these. My last question is, you talked about how wonderful and what a cornucopia of food we have as New Yorkers, which I tend to agree. And it is so international. And I see the Times, the paper, using, being purposeful about including a lot of different nationalities, foods of different nationalities, because, obviously for me, that is not only nice and refreshing to see, it is really what American food is.
Correct.
And is it hard, do you guys sit down and say, we need to cover this region more, or we need to get recipes from people who aren't white New Yorkers?
Right, absolutely, all the time. I mean, as a white New Yorker, it's hard for me to do anything but get stuff that isn't from white. I'm not interested in the food of white New Yorkers. I'm interested in the food of this country. And what's interesting to me, what's changed the most, is that when we started out with NYT Cooking, I would still get these pieces of mail with people saying why do you use these ethnic ingredients? I can't possibly get whatever, Chipotle. And I thought, really? Is this going to be an uphill battle in whatever that was, 2015? And the fact of the matter is, I'm so gratified to see that it isn't an uphill battle. That supermarkets, we still talk about food deserts, and they still exist. But the quality of supermarkets across the United States, the diversity of food markets across the United States, and the pernicious availability of internet. There's a big internet company that'll send you stuff really, I can't remember what it's called, but rhymes. Anyway, you can get anything that you need.
Yes, if you really want to.
And so the notion that publishing a recipe with tamarind pulp in it is going to be a problem for someone who lives in Kansas City is ludicrous at this point. They can get it. And that, to me, allows us, without blowing horns or tooting our own horns, allows us to use recipes to paint a picture of the United States that we live in and love that is far more diverse and interesting than, at least culinarily, than at any time in our history. And that's exciting.
Okay.
That's a good answer, right?
That's a good answer. I have a question from Orly. Which dish would teach you the most skills if prepared at home? If there's one dish.
Okay, well, there are a lot of ways of answering that question, and here's how I'm gonna answer it tonight. The roast chicken. If you can nail that roast chicken, or 2 roast chickens, or 3 roast chickens, or however many roast chickens you can get into your oven with all the people that you're coming, if you can get that perfectly burnished, crackly skin and moist interior at the breast and at the thigh, if you can get those pan juices just the way you want, salty, sweet, delicious, you're going to be a better cook than you were before you knew how to do that. And maybe you think you're a pretty good roast chicken cook. Think about some of the roast chickens you've had in restaurants in New York City that made yours maybe not as good. You can up your game. We can all up our roast chicken game, and we learn so much from the magic of the roast chicken.
Hi, Padma and Sam. My girlfriend is about to quit her corporate job.
Oh, nice.
To join culinary school. However, I do all the cooking at home.
Right.
How do I stop her from being a know-it-all? Where's Akshay? Where's Akshay? I want to see Akshay. Hi, okay. Well, you must be the girlfriend, right? I'm glad you're still smiling. That's a good sign.
You got to be careful with culinary school.
Yeah.
A lot of debt in culinary school, not a lot of debt in corporate America. At least not for the people in corporate America. What's the answer? Be humble. Like, everybody's got to be humble. Like, you go to culinary school, you learn how to do some stuff. That doesn't make you Padma Lakshmi. Like, be humble.
For the record, I never went to culinary school, but yes, but people in my office have.
Right.
Okay, so how do you tell when it's your fault, this is from Kelly, versus the recipe's fault when something doesn't turn out well?
Oh, wow.
I always blame the recipe, personally.
Yeah.
What do you do?
For tonight, and in relation to this book that I'm selling to support my family, I'm going to say it's your fault. It's interesting, when you cook. This goes back to the writing of the recipe. Remember in school when they told you to read the test question before answering it? I find I really want to read the recipe a number of times and kind of game it out in my head a little bit. And experience matters in this regard, but if you do that a lot, you'll start seeing, you'll be confused by the recipe. And if you read the recipe a couple times and you're still confused by the recipe, if the recipe goes awry, it's probably the recipe's fault. But here's the great thing about experience. If you're confused and you can dope out what's supposed to be happening, maybe you can fix the recipe on the fly. And I love it when that happens because it brings more confidence into your cooking, which is the whole point of this exercise from my point of view. That said, there have been a couple recipes that I've cooked where, wow, I've been way up a creek and no paddle, no, nothing.
Nothing can save you.
There's nothing. A bear's going to eat me up here. There's nothing.
What is one very important lesson that working at the Times has taught you? It's a great question, whoever wrote it.
That is a great question. You know, there's a line about grizzled old newspaper reporters and editors, and the editor says, like, I don't care if your mother says she loves you, go check it out. And I think there's something to that, particularly in an age where you can just sit at your keyboard and retrieve a lot of information. That doesn't mean that that information is correct. And it doesn't mean that you should act upon it as if it is correct. Social media teaches us this really loudly, but Google search teaches us this as well. And the lesson that I have learned in almost 20 years of working at the New York Times is go. Go to the place and find out for yourself. Make the phone call, talk to the people involved, call the chef in my case. It's not like I'm combat reporting. Go check it out. That's what I learned.
What is the worst meal you ever made?
Oh, made. Shoot.
I know.
I thought it was going to be 8, because then I could have told
That's
the story
easy.
of the brain.
You could tell us that story.
Oh, man, it was a deep fried brain in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was a little bit frozen at the center. And
Yum. My favorite kind of brain.
yeah, this was at the height of, like, oh boy. Yeah, that was bad. Interestingly, the waitress, my friend got a burger because he wasn't working, and the burger came with fries, and I wanted fries with my brain, and the waitress said, only chips with brain. And I got
The
potato
nerve,
chips,
yeah.
the nerve of it. Well, listen, they stuck to their vision. So I made a dish out of a since disgraced chef's cookbook for.
Ooh, I love this game. I won't say.
We won't say, but it was swordfish rollatini in a tomato sauce. You can probably figure this out. And it wasn't. This is it's otherwise a great cookbook. And maybe I was off my game. I don't know. My wife hated this thing so, and I was like, well, it's pretty good. And there was stony silence at the dinner table that day, and none of it was really eaten. And I tried. I've never made it since.
Okay, this is from Kristen. Hi, Sam. How do you find your New York Times food or cooking contributors? I have a personal love affair with Alison Roman, Melissa Clark, Kolu Henry, Kenji Alt Lopez. Thank you for bringing them into my life.
Well, thank you for allowing them into your life. And that you have an intimate relationship with all of them is magical. So it's great, right? Like to have these stars come into our universe and kind of light up our recipe boxes, if I can shatter this image, is so great, and I'm so grateful to all of them. I'll add others to the mix. Yuanda Komalafe is a real comer in our world, and I'm so proud to work with her. We're going to get Samin back when she's done with her show. Gabrielle Hamilton from Prune. These contributors who can bring a kind of variety of experience and a variety of tastes and cultures into our world allows the audience, allows each of you to find favorites, to find friends who in our world you can depend on somehow as the person for whom you're going to get that midweek meal, or you're going to get that great weekend project, or with Dory Greenspan you're going to get that great cake or cookies. For me, I hope you'll get confidence and hopefully some delicious eats as well.
Okay, and what, besides See You on Sunday, is your go-to cookbook and its best recipe? This is, I think, from Peter, or he thinks you're Pete Wells.
Oh.
One of the two.
Yeah, that would be funny if at the end of this I said, actually, I'm Pete Wells. Sam Sifton is off reviewing a restaurant. That really would be funny. So I bounce around in cookbooks a fair amount. Currently, there's a cookbook by Tony Tipton Martin called Jubilee that celebrates 200 years of African American cooking. And it celebrates a particular kind of cooking, which is essentially professional cooking, the cooking of restaurants and of posh private homes. And I published this recipe, or a version of this recipe, that I got out of Jubilee for pork chops and a lemon caper sauce with a little bit of a little roux in there to thicken up the sauce. That's out of this world, and I'm absolutely in love with it. But also in that book is a recipe for braised celery, which I would never have thought of as an amazing
Celery is the most underrated vegetable in the crisper.
Holler.
Yeah, no, I really believe
No,
that.
I think that's absolutely true. And cooking that dish, which immediately made it into my Thanksgiving repertoire, and then I thought will only be in my Thanksgiving repertoire, but no, I pair it with roast chicken all the time. I'm just telling you, there are 2 cookbooks you need to buy. One of them's mine, but the other one is Tony Tipton Martin's Jubilee.
She's a great writer.
She's amazing, an American treasure.
Do you have any advice for someone who lives alone to make a regular meal special?
Oh, I love the solo meal. I used to freak out about it because I'm the guy cooking for others, and so.
Does anyone cook for you ever?
Some of the best chefs in New York City.
Okay.
But only when I go to their restaurants, right? And my wife's an amazing cook, and so there I am.
There's too much food already in the house.
Yeah, I'm fractured by a flu, and she makes something better than I can make it. Oh God. But solo. So for years, my solo meal was I'd order from the kind of bulletproof glass Chinese place down the corner, like super spicy, extra well done, orange chicken with an egg roll, and I was like, this is solo eating. I love it. But that's sad. And I've finally gotten out of it. And I find that applying the same intentionality that I talk about in the book to cooking for yourself, which almost necessitates garnishing the grilled cheese sandwich you've made with something that makes it a little bit special, as if you were giving it to someone else to make them feel better, but you're giving it to yourself. That's pretty fun and magical. And a little public radio, and I'm happy.
Well, I think your fans know you have an excellent taste in music. I didn't know that. Do you have excellent taste in music?
Incredible. It's like...
What's your favorite album to cook to? This is from Cordelia.
Oh, it's so interesting how albums have been disrupted by streaming services. It's interesting. Like there was a lot of time when I would cook to albums. Right? There are a couple Toots and the Maytals records that for me are summer, and putting that CD in there, but that CD player barely works now, right?
Do you still have CDs?
I do. I've got this big pile. None of them work.
Okay.
The kids look at them like they're a Victrola.
Yeah.
And so there we are on a streaming service. But the interesting thing about the streaming service is that you can set a parameter and go through. And to me, it's a little bit like breakfast, where like I've got that week of just eating yogurt and cut fruit. And right now, what I listen to is a lot of Nigerian pop from the 70s. And it's like I'm just jamming out, having a good time, making my dinner, and it's great. It's great to have great taste in music.
Favorite place to eat in Harvard Square, Cambridge, from back in the day can be closed.
Oh.
This person obviously was in Cambridge.
In Cambridge, near Boston. Went to school near Boston. Yeah. I went to Harvard. I was in Harvard Square all the time. The Tasty was a great place to go and get a burger with an egg on top, absolutely hammered at 2 a.m. I missed the Tasty. The Tasty was good. But you know what? Do not sleep on the ham and cheese croissant that they had at the Au Bon Pain there. Really? Like back in the day. It was a really legitimate croissant. There was nothing French about it.
In the 90s, Au Bon Pain was really good.
It was kind of, it was something to aspire to as a child.
I have fond memories of the New York press.
Thank
For the sake of nostalgia, can you provide any anecdotes about that time in your life?
So the New York Press was a free, how many people remember that paper? Just a couple? Okay, so it was a free weekly giveaway paper that styled itself as the anti-Village Voice. And if you style yourself as the anti-Village Voice, there are going to be people who call you neocons, and we weren't neocons, but the owner was this kind of, Russ Smith was this lunatic neocon.
Neocon?
Yeah. But then we were, all the columns, I wrote about media and I wrote about food, and then we had a dominatrix who wrote about her life, and we had a guy who transcribed
Really?
this.
Have fun.
Mistress Ruby.
Wow.
She was something. Staff meetings. Anyway, we had a guy, Howie Kaplan, who transcribed his therapy sessions, Jim Knipfel, who was going blind and wrote about that. From him, he learned in a therapy class, an occupational therapy class, about how to fill up water if you're blind, where you put your finger on the inside, and so when your finger gets wet, you know the thing is full and you don't overfill it. The things you learn in the 90s.
That's good advice.
So New York Press was an amazing place to be, and an amazing kind of place to learn how to write a lot. I think I put down easily 3,000 words a week of various kinds of criticism and reporting, and there were no weeks off for us, so it was rough. But now that it's gone, the Voice went free, killing us basically, and then it was sold a few times, and then it went away. It was like an angry blog before there were blogs. And as such, I'm really glad it doesn't exist digitally, because there's stuff that we wrote in there that I'm not super proud of. And there's stuff that I probably would be proud of, but it's a little risky. I don't want to see it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Well, I suck at ending things, but end things we must. We have some books to sign, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm signing my book that you're buying. Please.
So please join us for our book signing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.